On Friday, October 22nd, the focus in class was the unfairness of a push for transgender youth sports bans. What in the holy hell does this have to do with English class? So I get this question all the time. What's the difference between education and indoctrination? Can you give me an example? Very often I get it from people who are not asking in good faith. They think they're asking a rhetorical question I won't be able to answer, but I'm going to answer it tonight anyway. And I'm going to use something that Erica Sanzi posted on Twitter. She gets the question a lot too. She says, reporters often ask me to explain difference between education and indoctrination. Here's a good read on that. And she links to a Daily Signal article. So we're going to go through it. And I'm going to read it to you and react to it as I go through it and give you my 2 cents. But hopefully you'll come away from this video having a better understanding of the difference between indoctrination and education. So let's take a look. This is the Daily Signal and education commentary by Matt Schoenfeld. My son's English teacher showed a transgender activist video in class. Here's what I did next. So let's look at the article. My 8th grade son, 8th grade. So that would be about a 13-year-old. My daughter's in 8th grade and she's 13 right now. My 8th grade son recently got a lesson in English class that featured a video of a transgender activist making a speech that includes sexually suggestive language in English class. Interesting. 8th grade. So many things they could be doing right now in English class, but it's a video featuring sexually suggestive language. As a society, we have seen this sort of thing play out time and time again in recent years. First, the left asks for tolerance, then acceptance, and then they demand that you celebrate their push for full social justice indoctrination in every classroom in America. The results of the governor's race in Virginia gives me hope that my wife and I are not alone in concern over the schools abusing the trust we place in them to protect our children. To me, this is not part of a culture war, but about keeping our schools focused on education and not indoctrination. Before we get to the definition part of the education and non-indoctrination, can we just spend a moment on what he says here about, to me, this is not part of a culture war, but about keeping our schools focused on education? Just education, regardless of whether you think it's indoctrination or not. This is English class, not sex ed. And that's before we know anything about what was discussed. It is English class. So is it fair to say that a parent should expect that during English class, we might be reading literature? You know, something like that. Doing grammar and composition, reading a book, fiction. We can read plenty of nonfiction in social studies, can't we? So, that would be the first thing I'd be wondering. To the credit of my son's middle school, when I requested a meeting about the use of this video on transgenderism in class October 4th, the principal immediately scheduled one 4 days later. As we will see, though, even if the principal wanted to resist such lessons, he would be hard-pressed to do so. So we now have a picture of a principal who was responsive. And by the way, the parents did the right thing. They contacted the school directly. And he hints at it. He says, as we'll see, even if the principal wanted to resist, he would be hard-pressed to do so. So let's continue. First, it is important to set the scene on what was so over the line about the lesson given to my son's class at a school in Howard County, Maryland. The 6-minute video is from a TED Talks presentation originally made in December 2017 by Jackson Bird, a transgender activist who was born a girl but identifies as a boy. Although appearing to be much younger in the video, Bird was about 27 at the time of the presentation, titled How to Talk and Listen to Transgender People. You can watch the video for yourself, but here are some of the lowlights. In just the first minute, my 13-year-old son, so I was right about the 13-year-old, and about 20 classmates were treated to hypothetical questions and insightful observations from Bird about transgender individuals, such as, I wonder if he's had the surgery yet. Oh, now I'm looking at his crotch. Wait, how does he use the bathroom? How does he have sex? People are pretty much always wondering how we have sex and what kind of equipment we're working with below the belt. 8th graders. And it's English class. So I'd really like to know which of the state standards for English language arts, ELA, this kind of a lesson serves. Why this topic? even if you're going to turn around and write about it, as we'll soon see that is what they were going to do, why this topic for 13-year-olds? What was the motivation here? Right? So when you're trying to decide if something is education versus indoctrination, first question you have to ask yourself is it developmentally appropriate? Can the students respond to this in a way that is truly thoughtful? Or are they going to be getting a message that they have to respond to it in a very specific way? Is there a sort of an implicit, appropriate and inappropriate way to respond, even if the material itself might be developmentally inappropriate? And when you're talking about something as controversial as transgenderism, I think the hint was received by all the students. They're not stupid. They may be young, but they're not stupid. This topic is radioactive. Kids know it. And so you really have to wonder about the motives of the teacher. Let's continue. What a wonderful educational opportunity for my son to sit through and then be subjected to a ridiculous prompt from his teacher to, quote, share something you learned from the video. Share something you learned from the video. Talk about a minefield. Something you learned. What if you didn't learn anything other than your teacher is kind of creepy? What if this made you intensely uncomfortable because you're 13 and that would be normal? If this were about heterosexual sex, let's replace transgenderism and it's a video about somebody wondering how someone else has sex and what they're working with below the belt and how they go to the bathroom. But it's, the person is cisgendered and they're hetero and so forth. Is that appropriate for English class? What did the child learn? What are they going to share? And why are they sharing it with their adult teacher and their classmates? What is the motivation behind that? And how does it support the teaching of the English standards for 8th grade in Maryland? Only affirmation acceptable. In the video, Bird asserts, so we now know that the person in the video asserts something. So the question, what did you learn, is almost tailor-made for the kids to answer with the assertion that was put forward. Not what was the opinion expressed, so then the student might be able to agree or disagree. Or what is the presentation about? At least then we could deal with some comprehension issues. But that would be listening comprehension, not reading comprehension, wouldn't it? So I guess if you're talking about English in terms of listening to the spoken word and understanding spoken English, maybe. But I don't think most parents think that their students are going to English class to listen to speeches and then recount how much they understood. Unless, of course, it was a great speech like Martin Luther King and you're studying rhetoric. Then maybe it would be appropriate. But this, I don't know. What are we working with below the belt doesn't seem too challenging in terms of vocabulary or rhetoric for that matter. So we know he is in the video. Bird asserts that it is only awkward being trans because all of us uneducated rubes do not understand what it's like to be trans. Biological realities are simply our misconceptions denying that gender can be misassigned at birth. Quote, when you come out as trans, Bird says in the video, you have to face the misconceptions that will color other people's impressions of you even after you've educated them. Is it misconceptions or disagreements? Because, people are allowed to disagree. People are allowed to go with biological science and disagree with your value system and your beliefs. That is how that works. It is not a fact that this person is now a boy. It is not a fact. In fact, genetically, this person is a girl, a female. There you have it. A trans activist is now in charge of my son's 8th grade English lesson. That's quite an opinion for this trans activist to express to 8th graders. And now the teacher is asking, what did you learn? If only they were mature enough and had enough courage to say, well, I learned that my teacher is an activist trying to groom us to agree with their opinion about transgenderism. And that is where you start to understand the difference between education and indoctrination. Education would, at a minimum, allow the children to disagree with the trans activist. When that's not on the table, we're in indoctrination land. Affirmation is the only acceptable way to address the transgender issue, and you must use a trans individual's preferred pronouns as soon as you are told the person's new name and pronouns, Bird says during the talk, filmed before a small, mostly quiet audience. I'm a career Army officer. My wife works as a teaching assistant in an elementary school. We make a practice of reviewing the health lessons at our son's middle school, but naively never thought to look at English lessons. And why would you? Of course, if you watch this channel, I've been telling you for months that you have to do that you have to look at all the subjects and you have to look at all the lessons. You have to pay very close attention and ask your kids lots of questions or ask the teachers lots of questions because they're putting this everywhere. So if you thought they were reading literature and having writing prompts about themes and characters and setting, you were wrong. You were wrong. That's not what's going on at all. They're not learning grammar. And as I said, they're not even learning speeches for the value of their rhetoric. It's not like the teacher said, is the speaker making an assertion that is of fact or opinion? How can you tell? How can you tell this is an opinion? What words did the speaker use that let you know it's his opinion? Did the speaker give enough evidence to support their opinion? Why do you think so? Why do you think not? No, it's education. So, I mean, ironically, although I don't agree with the material, this same material could have been used for educational purposes in an English class if it was studied on the basis of its rhetoric, the way the words were used, the way the sentences were strung together, the vocabulary chosen. Why do you think the speaker chose this word? Why do you think the speaker is approaching it this way? Do you think it's persuasive? Or do you feel like they're lecturing you? Do you feel like they're, giving you any room to disagree? And the teacher certainly isn't giving any room to disagree, near as I can tell so far, but let's keep going. So, we were surprised by this lesson openly advocating the LGBTQ agenda and using a trans activist propaganda speech disguised as English instruction. That brings us to the three other actors involved in my meeting at the school: the pusher, the patsy, and the unwitting accomplice. This is another way you know it's indoctrination, is how the people of the school react when you come in and ask questions or you express your concern about the lesson. They're not able to explain to you the educational value of it. In the role of the pusher is the district's director of the English language arts curriculum. The patsy is played by the fully indoctrinated teacher, a young woman straight out of the higher education system. I'm so shocked. And the unwitting accomplice is none other than our principal. This cast of characters illustrates why it's so hard to stop the blatant indoctrination of our kids at schools. Our pusher sits on high and dreams up ways to create new lesson plans to be shipped down to the patsy teacher, who will happily carry the message down to your kids too. The pusher is active in all fronts of kids' education. Our pusher helps craft the Howard County Public School System's educational equity policy, LGBTQIA plus youth policy, and creative events celebrating the small minority who aren't heterosexual, such as HOCO Pride 2021. So you think there was a little bit of an agenda in selecting this lesson to be handed to the recent graduate of the teacher education program? Certainly seems that way. Do you think this was about studying the different ways people use rhetoric to understand the difference between opinion and fact? No. Crossing the line. During the 35-minute meeting, I expressed serious concern over this lesson being taught in my son's English class with no prior notice to parents. I questioned why the school openly advocates LGBTQ plus activism and presents it as something that must be celebrated. Our pusher tried to obfuscate reality and told me, to the best of my memory, with all due respect, trans and LGBTQ people's existence is not controversial. Let's go back. Rewind. So they expressed serious concern over the lesson being taught in the son's English class with no prior notice to parents. I questioned why the school openly advocates LGBTQ activism and presents it, the activism, as something that must be celebrated. Now, a teacher of English ought to understand what is the subject and object of that sentence, don't you think? And then the pusher goes straight to the existence of these people is not controversial. Was there anything about what these parents said that suggested it was? Is the lesson about the existence of these people? Is it? They're questioning the activism. Thanks, but that is not what I said. There's a lot of ground between introducing the existence of transgender and LGBTQ people as part of the Howard County School System's Family Life and Human Sexuality curriculum during a lesson in health class and open advocacy by an English teacher who presents a video of a talk by a trans activist. So, as we said in the beginning, this was not health class. This was not sex ed. And this was nothing to do with just discussing the existence of LGBTQ people. This was advocacy. It's pretty clear. If there were any doubt where our Patsy stands on the issue, she was wearing a Protect Trans Lives t-shirt and hat for the lesson. Do you think the students had any room to disagree with anything that was said? Do you think they were feeling like everything in the video is a statement of fact at this point, at least in the eyes of their teacher, whether they agreed or not? Another hint that we're dealing with indoctrination, because there's no way to question any of this, challenge it, disagree, or take anything away from it other than what the teacher wants you to think, which is celebrate, save lives. She included a PowerPoint slide promoting the Howard County Pride event and calling for students to come celebrate LGBTQ plus identities. Celebrate the identities. That's activism in the classroom, in the English classroom. She added these words to the slide: "I'll be at Pride from 1 to 6. I hope to see you there." No pressure. No pressure. I hope to see you there, and I'll be noticing who's there and who's not there. That's the message. Do you think that's appropriate for your English teacher to do to your kids who are 13 years old? As if they could get themselves there. They now have to go ask their parents to go. That's not uncomfortable at all. Okay. That clearly crosses the line from a neutral lesson to open advocacy. I think so. Yeah. The pusher, the curriculum director for English language arts, did not see it that way. I'm shocked. She lectured me for over 5 minutes about how it's the school's job to ensure students are exposed to sensitive subjects, hiding behind a distortion of the windows and mirrors instructional method. She had created a curriculum to incorporate lessons about LGBTQ community to all English language arts classrooms in the Howard County School District. So it's the school's job to expose them to sensitive subject. No, actually, it's not. No, it's not. It's not the school's job to expose them to anything other than opportunities to learn and grow as individuals. And as I said, there was a way they could have presented the same speech and taught English around it. I still would disagree with the subject matter, but at least it would be defensible. It would be defensible as an English lesson. It would be defensible as education. We could disagree about the developmental appropriateness. That's about it. But as it is, it was full-blown advocacy, which means indoctrination. The pusher further explained that the Patsy, the young teacher, had adapted a lesson called Exploring the Unknown, originally about space exploration, and now expanded for new opportunities to explore equity lessons. I never got a straight answer to my question of what English topic the lesson covered, despite asking it several times. So we're exploring the unknown, which is about exploring space. Again, that's a science class, don't you think? Or even social studies, humanities possibly, but I mean, English, ELA, and it's now an opportunity to explore equity in English class. You see why I'm telling you guys you need to pay attention? It's everywhere. It's in every single class, and they're going to jerry-rig it in there so that every single class period covers this agenda. And what's not getting taught while they're doing this, as I just said, they're not learning about rhetoric and word choice. They don't understand the difference between propaganda and facts or news. They don't understand, opinion versus fact, and they know perfectly well, as I said in a video I made earlier today, how to play this game. I hope to see you there. I'll be looking. They know the game. I want to get an A. I'm either going to have to show up or come up with a damn good excuse for not being there. And I'm going to have to go along to get along and pretend that this is okay. And what I learned is that it's really important to recognize and respect, transgender people. And I learned that affirmation is the only way. And I learned, is that really learning? Or is that I can spit back the ideas that you just shoved down my throat? That's indoctrination. I lost count, but the curriculum director used the words inclusion or inclusive well over a dozen times, except guess who's left out? His son. Yeah. I can assure you that she did not mean inclusion for my son. I'm just one line ahead of him, aren't I? After enduring her full lecture of how I simply did not understand the importance of the school's indoctrination of my son, I started to speak. She cut me off mid-sentence to attempt to berate me more. I told her that I was respectful and listened to her, and now it was my turn to speak. Good man. Nothing to do with English. This is when I told the curriculum director I did not need her to indoctrinate my son into LGBTQ activism. I also told her that she had lost my trust to introduce, quote, sensitive subjects to him. And of course, why would she keep it? are going to argue that it's the school's job to present sensitive subjects and you have an obligation. And with that power comes responsibility. And the responsibility is to present it in an objective way that does not take a specific viewpoint and ram it down their throats. Because again, these are sensitive subjects by their own admission. So unless you want to confess that you think it's your obligation to present sensitive subjects in a very specific light, to advocate for a specific position on sensitive, controversial topics, so you acknowledge they're controversial, you acknowledge they're sensitive, you acknowledge that, why would they be sensitive if everybody agreed? If it was mainstream, it wouldn't be sensitive, would it? It would be mainstream. So they're saying, we know this isn't something everybody's comfortable with. We know that not everybody agrees with us. But what they're saying is it's our job to give them our view, the school's view, which is really the same thing as saying the state's view, the government's view, the correct thought. I then turned to the Patsy teacher and said words to this effect: I do not trust your judgment to educate my son about LGBTQ or other sensitive topics and want him opted out of all future lessons about those. I elaborated that what the teacher had done went well beyond introducing a sensitive topic and instead was openly advocating that our sons celebrate lifestyles that my wife and I do not condone. The principal, as an unwitting accomplice, was stuck in the middle. He acknowledged that the video of Bird's talk went over the line, but hedged his bet by saying that the message was simply lost on some eighth graders who might not have the maturity yet to get past the shock of how the young transgender speaker presented the subject. You see what they do there? I gotta walk down the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, this was out of line, but they probably didn't understand it anyway. They probably didn't get it. And it was probably lost on them. And it was, maybe a little over their head, but it's still good. No. Although I am grateful that the principal openly acknowledged that this video was inappropriate for school, his view loses sight of the fact that this lesson should not be part of English class at all. I do not want to speak for the principal, but it was clear that he was uncomfortable with the whole discussion about the lesson. He even said that he largely agreed with most of my concerns, for whatever that is worth. I really agree with you. There's nothing I can do. But you're the principal. These people technically report to you. You could theoretically write them up or discipline them or tell them to cut the crap. I don't know about the curriculum director, but certainly the teacher. I don't know. There's nothing I can do. Wow, that's helpful. At least he had the meeting. I guess that's something. I walked away with more respect for the principal than when the meeting started because he had the courage to meet with me. Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad that we have to congratulate the principal for actually having a meeting with concerned parents? That is really freaking sad. And even somewhat agree with my concerns in the face of the pusher and much to the bemusement of the Patsy. However, the principal is emblematic of the problem at hand. Even if he wanted to resist these lessons, he would do it at the likely cost of his job. This made him the unwitting accomplice, haplessly nodding along with the pusher's agenda and my concerns over the open indoctrination of my son. During the meeting, I did get quite animated. At one point, I said something like, if I sound angry, it's because I am angry. I thought I could trust that school would be a place where I did not have to worry about my son being indoctrinated by beliefs I do not share. I'm not sure if this is enough for the pusher to phone the FBI hotline and immediately report me as a domestic terrorist, but I will keep a closer eye on vans in the neighborhood. I don't blame you, sir. I mean, it's gotten to that point, like we're not allowed to disagree with what they do. We're not allowed to get angry when our kids are being emotionally abused and used by pusher activists and groomers, really. Yeah, you're allowed to get angry. It's unfortunate they're trying to silence you. Parents, see for yourselves. If parents who read this article check their school district's website and their child's Canvas pages, I suspect they will be quite surprised by what they find. I encourage every parent to do this and to schedule a meeting at their school like I did. Hopefully you'll be able to opt out your children prior to their indoctrination lessons. In our son's case, he is now opted out of future lessons pushing LGBTQ plus activism and was assigned a separate book to read, an option from the earlier incarnation of the Exploring the Unknown lesson. It's still about space. I mean, I guess it's a book, but do they ever read fiction anymore? They're going to read plenty of nonfiction and social studies and science. Could they please read some fiction? I'm going to have to do a whole video on why fiction is important because this is getting ridiculous. However, our son still had to sit through more writing prompts presented to the whole English class about the subject. On Friday, October 22nd, the focus in class was the unfairness of a push for transgender youth sports bans. What in the holy hell does this have to do with English class? Oh, but it's a writing prompt. Get a load of this. This is absolutely classic in terms of illustrating the difference between education and indoctrination. Get a load of these prompts, okay? In response, our son's classmates had to write about either What are our responsibilities to explore and create more inclusive, equitable future? Or how do we hold or create space for change in society when we learn about people who have been marginalized? 8th grade English. Both of those present a conclusion that the students now have to defend. Here's my view. Here's my point of view. Back it up. Back up my opinion, student. That's indoctrination. This is my opinion. Now tell me why I'm right. That's exactly what that is. How do we hold or create space? What if I don't want to? Sorry, that's not an option. What are our responsibilities? None. We don't have any. It is not our responsibility as 13-year-olds to do this. Who is our? Who is we in this sentence? Can you just write a single sentence going, not my responsibility, and we don't? The end. Answered both prompts. That's not okay? No. Well, see, that would actually be education, allowing them to answer as they see fit, as succinctly as humanly possible. I'd give that kid an A, but apparently this teacher wouldn't. Not exactly a balanced look at the complex issue of allowing boys to play girls' sports and what states are doing to protect young women and their opportunities. And why would this be an English class? Maybe social studies or current events, but even there, can we teach them to write well enough to even write anything about these topics? Because 8th grade, yeah, they're not there. I tutor kids in these grades. I have a kid in this grade, as I said at the outset. They're just not ready to write about this stuff yet. I promise you they're not. So this is really just tell me how I'm right lesson. My Army career has made our family's involvement in local communities quite transitory in nature. The sensitivities surrounding political involvement as an active duty officer made me quite reluctant to tackle local issues. However, I decided to look up the next election for the Howard County Board of Education and learned much to my chagrin that it won't be until 2024. The good part, though, is I will have time to find like-minded parents either to support school board candidates who share our values or to run themselves. I do not want to cede control of our schools to political ideologues, but to make them places where the priority is teaching our children the skills they will need in life. This will be an uphill struggle because pushers, patsies, and unwitting accomplices are everywhere in public school systems, openly advocating liberal indoctrination in every subject matter and in every district, but it is a fight we must have. Now, that's great, and I hope that somebody pulls him aside and educates him about the fact that the pusher does not report to the school board at all. Even the principal doesn't. The principal reports to the superintendent, who does report to the school board. But as we've just seen, it's really not the principal's fault. It's the pusher. Where does the pusher come from? Well, the pusher is, I honestly don't know if they work for the whole district. They weren't hired by the school board. They're probably hired by the superintendent. So possibly the school board could do something through the superintendent to deal with the pusher, but I can almost guarantee you that if you look at the Maryland state standards, you will find that they have some kind of gender equity policy from the state on down, and the pusher is just doing her job. Of course, she's happy to do her job, it sounds like. She took the job intentionally for this purpose, and so did the patsy, but this is coming from the tippy top. And the tippy top takes its cues from the universities, from the teacher colleges and teaching universities. So good luck with the school board. But there you have it. The difference between education. Let's discuss this speech. Did they do a good job of making their case? How did they use persuasive language? What words were persuasive? What were not? Give me some examples of, persuasive sentences in the speech. Give me some examples of sentences that were pure opinion, or give me some facts from the speech. Let's see if we can identify them and pick out the vocabulary words. See if you could write a speech about an issue important to you using similar devices. That would be education. And that's leaving aside the subject matter, which I still think is not appropriate, okay? But you could at least defend that. But instead, as I said, none of that happened. And this was all about, here's our opinion. Tell us how we're right. And that's what most of these lessons do, whether it's English class and LGBTQIA plus advocacy, or it's social studies and critical race theory, 1619 project, whatever it is, you're going to get a lot of this. And the grand irony and tragedy is, if they actually taught them English language arts, these kids would be equipped to identify the abuse they're suffering in the school, which is, of course, precisely why they don't teach it to them. So they won't know. And maybe they'll grow up to be the next generation of parents who won't show up and complain because they won't know any better. they won't recognize the difference. That's the game. So I hope I've answered the question. I hope you liked the video. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel, like, comment, share, and all that. Thanks for watching. That's the video.